She was a queen who lost her crown, buried her son, outlived her enemies, and when they finally asked her what she wanted after everything was taken from her, this French-born warrior queen looked them dead in the eyes and said, "Absolutely nothing." Because Margaret of Anjou had already burned the world down once, and she was considering doing it again. England, 1455. A kingdom divided. Two roses, one red, one white, about to drown a nation in blood. But this isn't a story about kings and their squabbles. No, this is about a queen who refused to let men destroy her son's future. A queen who picked up a sword when her husband lost his mind. Her name was Margaret. Margaret of Anjou was never your typical princess. While other girls embroidered cushions, Margaret studied Caesar's military campaigns. While they practiced curtsying, she practiced, well, let's just say her brothers learned not to underestimate her in sword practice. But fate had other plans. At 15, she was shipped off to England to marry King Henry VI. Poor Henry. Kind soul. Gentle as a lamb. And about as useful in a crisis. Henry was more interested in founding colleges than running kingdoms. Margaret. She took one look at the squabbling nobles around her and thought, oh dear. I've married into a nest of vipers. The most dangerous viper. Richard, Duke of York. Ambitious. Cunning. And absolutely convinced he should be king. And then, everything fell apart. In 1453, Henry's mind simply left. One day he was king, the next, he couldn't recognize his own wife. Or his newborn son, Edward. York seized his chance. He declared himself protector of the realm. Which is medieval speak for I'm in charge now. Margaret knew exactly what that meant. Her son would never be king. Unless she did something about it. Margaret made a decision that would shock England. If the men wouldn't fight for her son's birthright, then by God, she would. She began gathering an army. York and his allies thought they were dealing with a queen. They were about to meet a general. The Wars of the Roses had begun. At first, Margaret watched from the sidelines. The Battle of St. Albans, Yorkists won. Somerset, her loyal supporter, was killed. Margaret held her young son tight and made a vow, never again would she be helpless. Miracle of miracles, Henry recovered. But the England he woke up to was fractured. Margaret tried to rule through him, but York wasn't giving up. The kingdom balanced on a knife's edge. And then York made his move. Now, Margaret wasn't exactly trained in warfare. Medieval queens learned French poetry, not military strategy. But Margaret, she was a quick study. And she had something those crusty old lords didn't. She was fighting for her child. December 30th, 1460. Wakefield. Margaret had helped plan something audacious, a trap for York himself. He was holed up in Sandal Castle with a small force. Margaret's commanders, Somerset's son, the Earl of Northumberland, Lord Clifford, they were ready. But it was Margaret who gave the final order. York took the bait. He rode out to fight, thinking he had the advantage. He was wrong. York died in the snow. His son, Edmund, barely 17, cut down beside him. It was brutal. It was bloody. It was war. They say Margaret ordered York's body mocked, his head crowned with paper, and stuck on York's own city gates. Was it true? Maybe. Medieval politics weren't for the faint of heart. Victory. But Margaret couldn't celebrate. For every enemy she defeated, another rose to take his place. York's eldest son, Edward, young, charismatic, and absolutely furious, was now her enemy. And he was good. Very good. Margaret raised the largest army she'd ever commanded. 20,000 men. But here's the thing about medieval armies, they weren't exactly professional. More like temporarily organized chaos. They needed food. They needed money. And they helped themselves. The stories of looting spread. The northern barbarians are coming, they cried in London. Margaret's fearsome reputation. It was both her weapon and her curse. The Second Battle of St. Albans. This time, Margaret wasn't watching. She was commanding. The Earl of Warwick, Kingmaker they called him, held Henry captive with the Yorkist forces. Margaret was coming to rescue her husband and destroy Warwick. Contemporary accounts say she rode through the camps the night before, rallying her men. Can you imagine? A queen in armor, promising them victory. Some thought her mad. Others? They'd follow her into hell itself. Margaret had learned from Wakefield. Strike hard. Strike smart. And never, ever give your enemy time to think. The Yorkists fled. Warwick abandoned Henry, who was found sitting under a tree, singing. Margaret finally had her husband back. London. So close. The capital lay before her. But the city gates remained shut. Londoners feared her army more than they loved their king. Margaret faced an impossible choice: force her way in and turn the city against her, or retreat, and lose everything. She retreated. Some called it weakness. But Margaret knew she couldn't rule a city that despised her. It was, perhaps, her greatest mistake. Because while she withdrew north, Edward of York marched into London unopposed, and crowned himself King Edward IV. Towton. Palm Sunday, 1461. The bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. Margaret had left for York before it began, with Henry and Edward. Her forces fought without her, and were destroyed. 28,000 men dead in the snow. Margaret fled to Scotland, then France. An exiled queen, still fighting. 4 years, she'd plot, scheme, raise armies. She'd return to fight at Barnet in 1471, only to see her forces defeated again. And then, the unthinkable. Tewkesbury, May 4th, 1471. Margaret's army, exhausted from marching, faced Edward IV one last time. And there, in the chaos of battle, her worst nightmare came true. Her son. Her Edward. The boy she'd fought for, the prince she'd raised to be king, died on that field. Margaret was captured. Everything she'd fought for, gone. They kept her prisoner for 5 years. Henry was dead, her son was dead. Her cause was dead. Everything, except Margaret. In 1476, the French king ransomed her. She returned to Anjou, penniless, broken. She died in 1482, at 52 years old. Forgotten by England. Vilified in history books as a she-wolf, a foreign witch who brought war. But here's what they don't tell you. Margaret of Anjou commanded armies when women weren't supposed to leave the castle. She made tactical decisions that won battles. She fought for 13 years against impossible odds, for a son who would never be king and a husband who barely knew who she was. She wasn't perfect. She was ruthless. Perhaps too ruthless. But she was also brave, brilliant, and absolutely refused to give up. The Wars of the Roses destroyed a generation, but Margaret of Anjou, She went down fighting. History remembers the kings. But sometimes, the queens deserve the story too.